Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayerStoo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayerStoo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayerStoo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It means a huge amount to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. How are you getting on?
Not bad at all. Lewis, we're getting right stuck into this. I'm not even going to bother asking you what you've been playing because I know that we've both been playing God of War.
We have indeed, yeah. Ragnarok is here.
As the world has a belief. Ragnarok is here, Lewis.
Yeah, I've played about the first 9 or so hours, I think, over a couple of play sessions. I think you're roughly the same, right? Just maybe slightly further ahead.
Yeah, we are actually just discussing this before the show. Literally, we've not discussed the game at all, I don't think, apart from saying, yeah, these reviews are really good. But yeah, I think that we're actually very, very close, which is convenient for a podcast list.
Yeah, unintentional, but yeah, what a great opener. I don't really know how you want to do this. We could do almost like a mini play along every week for the next 6 weeks, probably.
I mean, sort of, I guess. I do want to say, just immediately off the bat here, there will ultimately be some very minor spoilers, I would say, when we discuss this. It will be nothing significant to the story, nothing that I would consider spoiling the whole game, but inevitably there will be things discussed in this particular part of the podcast that you might consider spoilers, and if you want to go in completely clean, maybe just skip this little bit. Just skip a little bit ahead and then we'll be over that, and then we'll be into the news and it'll be all that good stuff. But Lewis, the opening of this, I have to say, pretty strong, I think I would say. The game is fantastic, basically, is where I'm coming at it from. However, I do have to say, it is yet to really wow me as much as the first game did so far anyway. It also is hitting a lot of the same beats as the first game, particularly in the opening, which was, I mean, I don't want to say it was shot for shot, but I mean, there was a big fight at the beginning that was very similar to the Baldur fight in the first game. Gameplay wise, it is also very, very similar, and I know that there was sort of narrative justification for that, and that's totally fine. And to be clear, the gameplay is great, so I'm not really complaining about that. But one of the things we talked about when this game was coming out and thinking about reviews and whatever was how are they going to improve this? And all the reviews did seem to say, oh, this is better, they've improved things and whatever and blah 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 blah. I'm going to be honest, I'm not seeing a huge amount of improvement. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that is very similar, which I'm not really saying is a complaint. I'm not really saying that as a complaint at all, because when it was so good in the first place, is that really a problem? Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I don't think that there is any revolution in the game, I suppose I would say, but a lot of it feels very familiar. But that isn't a bad thing either. You know what I mean? I suppose that's how I'm sort of feeling about it. But headline, yet to wow me, but I am thoroughly enjoying it so far.
Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest, Mark, you've hit quite a lot of my feelings on it already there. Similarly, I mean, I think it's really impressive, visually gorgeous. The gameplay is fantastic. The combat, particularly when you start leveling up quite early on, really starts to open up. I was a wee bit worried at first that I was just mashing R1 and R2 and that was kind of it, but already quite early on. And I guess just to reinforce everything that you just said, we are only talking about the first 10 hours here, so there's every potential that things are going to drastically change and go off in sort of really revolutionary directions. But yeah, thus far everything feels very much like God of War 2018 to me, nicely polished, more or less a continuation of that game. I remember when we originally spoke about this years ago when it was first kind of revealed, there was a discussion, and certainly I was kind of leaning more on that side. I think that this might be more of a halfway point between the first game and a proper
Morales
sequel. Yeah, a wee bit like that,
rather than a full sequel.
I sort of imagined what we might just get is back on the big bridge and all the other realms being unlocked, or several other realms being unlocked. And thus far, I mean, it's different from that, but I wouldn't say that at its core it feels a lot different to that concept of just more of that previous game, but with a few new realms unlocked and a couple of extra things. So like there's that weird reflecting stone that you've come across in one of the areas.
I mean, they've worked the mechanics.
There's very minor mechanical tweaks, which I'm not actually sure that any of them have added a great deal yet, to be honest. And to me, all the kind of leveling up and RPG systems feel a little bit like unexplored up till this point as well. Like, as I say, other than pumping points into the kind of skill trees, and like, I'm not really upgrading a lot of my armor and stuff yet because I just don't feel like anything's kind of happened. I mean, I have done, don't get me, and I've got the special armor that you get for doing one of the side quests or whatever, but I don't know, just none of that yet feels like it's really opened up. Like, I feel like I've almost filled in the skill tree already, and I'm really early in the game, so I'm kind of like, at some point something is going to happen that really kicks this into touch. And there has been a couple of moments. There's one thing that I won't say specifically what it is because I don't want to spoil that for anyone, but there's a gameplay moment where something happens that I don't think happened in the first game, and that obviously points in the direction that this game might take us. Moments like that are kind of more what I'm expecting from the rest of this game in the next 2/3 of it.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely, particularly where you are, Lewis, I mean, literally the next couple of missions later where I am, I feel as though I have a lot of, I don't know, lore and prophecy talk happening at me, which is implying to me that we could be in for quite a serious change going forward. So that will be interesting. What I will say, and again, I suppose this is a relatively minor spoiler, and I literally don't know if this is what you were getting at there, but you do play as Atreus in this game, which is a really interesting turn because I actually really enjoyed playing as Atreus. I thought playing as him was great. Like, really, really enjoyable.
I actually wondered if the combat was made even smoother with him, because I felt like I was rattling enemies in a way that Kratos was labouring a wee bit, and I just thought, are they setting us up for something there? You know,
I mean, frankly, I think they might be, judging by a lot of the prophecy talk I was previously talking about there. But yeah, I mean, very interesting, and I think that Atreus plays really, really well, like really well, and is like a genuine joy to play as, and you feel strong even though you're supposed to be like, was he like 13 or something? Like this 13-year-old kid taking on fucking zombies and shit. No, it's really, really good, really enjoyable. Like, the gameplay, while I'm saying it's not changed a lot, is still so strong. Like, it's still great. It's really, really, really good. Like, everything feels satisfying. Like, every time you bring the Leviathan axe down on anything, it just feels so satisfying. Anytime you throw it away and bring it back with that satisfying zoomph every single time, it just feels great. Like, I've never known a game to feel so fucking tactile before as God of War. Like, it feels so good to play.
It definitely does. It's got a real weight to it in that sense. One thing I've really loved about this one is having the Chaos Blades right from the start as well.
I was wondering if they were going to do that, because obviously that was unlocked later on, and it
was a huge moment.
2018 game is like a really, really big moment, and I was thinking, well, narratively it makes sense to have them, but will they actually give us them right at the start? And they don't. They only have you with the Leviathan axe, but then he very quickly after that picks up the Chaos Blades.
Exactly.
And like, this is great. And do you know what it does so well? It really truly feels like a continuation of that previous game. Like, it just feels as though we've just picked up exactly where we left off. Kratos has all the same skills basically that he has. I know we're unlocking stuff and whatever here and there, but basically he has the Leviathan axe, he has the Chaos Blades, he has the chisel and all whatever that you have to open the gates, and all the things that you picked up in the previous game he already has, because narratively of course he would still have all those things, you know what I mean? And I just like that none of that has been compromised to make it more video gamey.
Exactly.
I love that. It's so good.
It's really refreshing to just come in and still feel like you're that same character, and you might not have all the same attacks right away or whatever, but you're definitely not far off it. And particularly even from the perspective of, like, this is meant to be a very slightly older Kratos, it's a slightly older Atreus. They could easily have done a whole like, oh, he's not quite who he was and he's not got all the same skills, but you're playing the same guy. This is a continuation, definitely. But that's kind of what I mean. Like, I wonder if after a certain point here, this game, you know, particularly when Ragnarok properly begins, if it is to begin, that this might all kick off in a really major way, and we might, you know, in next week's show or the week after that, be saying like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe this is what's been happening here, you know. I'm hoping for that, because as much as like 30 hours of this would be great, and it's a genuine joy to play, like, considering how much I've complained this year about like slogging in games, this is a game that you can pick up at any point. It's always got a bit of challenge, but the cadence between combat and puzzles is great. The ability to just go off and do something else, or just to sit and kind of upgrade your stuff for a while, look at the lore, explore a bit. It's just a really fun space to be in, and I think that's a great kind of end of year game to be playing.
Oh, absolutely, man. That balance there between all those points is just near perfect as far as I'm concerned. I do have to say as well that apparently God of War has outsold Call of Duty and Elden Ring in terms of boxed copies here in the UK, and is second only to FIFA, which is a very, very impressive feat for a console exclusive game.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
I mean? Yeah, this game is really sold incredibly well, and I can see why people were excited about it because of 2018. And yeah, I'm very, very excited to see where this continues to go, this story continues to develop, because I trust in Sony Santa Monica, I trust in this game, and I'm sure at some point they're going to blow my fucking mind, and I'm very much looking forward to that list. All right, I think it is time for the news. All right, list news item number 1. The Game Awards nominations have been announced this week. This is Jeff Keighley's Game Awards, for avoidance of doubt. God of War leads the nominations with 10, followed by Elden Ring and Horizon Forbidden West, both of which have 7. Sony has done very well this year, as you might expect, with God of War and Horizon Forbidden West coming out in the same year, and has dominated nominations overall with 20. The next closest is Nintendo with 11, but also Annapurna as well with 11, which is nice that they are high up there as an indie publisher drawn with Nintendo. I think that that's pretty great. That also doesn't include other PlayStation exclusives, by the way, which have got quite a lot of nominations, specifically Stray, which has also got 6, and Sifu, which has got 3, both of which were console exclusive on PlayStation. So, pretty good year for PlayStation, I would say, in terms of these awards lists. Not so great on the Xbox side, I have to say, but that is because they have released no games this year. Their only nominations have come for As Dusk Falls, and they've got 2 nominations for that. The Game Awards this year have also added a best adaptation of a video game category, which includes things like Edge Runners and the Cuphead show and the Sonic movie and the Uncharted movie and things like that. You know what I mean? Basically, video games adapted into other media, I think, is what they're going for. I would have thought you would have got awards for things like remakes before that, personally, but anyway. Lewis, what are your thoughts on the award nominations generally?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we expect, I think, by and large, isn't it?
Yeah, I have to say, like, there was a lot of moaning about this.
There's always a lot of moaning about this.
I know that every year there's a lot of moaning, but it feels as though, like, sort of broad strokes, it feels like, yeah, that's about right.
I mean, yeah, it does feel like that. I mean, partly I would say that that's because it's not been an utterly fantastic year for games, certainly at that, like, top level. And I guess to address that first, that's generally the complaint, or a lot of the complaints, is that this show sort of rewards a particular type of game and often a particular kind of budget of a game more than a lot of particularly like smaller outlets might want for. They might want more recognition to fall in some of these other smaller games, particularly in some of the categories like that are more about creativity, like narrative, or like, you know, some of the, you know, acting categories and all that kind of thing. But ultimately, this is, you know, this should be expected. It's the same kind of list every year. The games that everyone should have expected to be on these category lists are there. I think to jump into Game of the Year, like, it feels like a 2-tier or maybe even a 3-tier thing to me here. I mean, this is certainly a shootout between God of War and Elden Ring, right?
It's God of War and Elden Ring and everything else, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but to me, even then, like Forbidden West, which I think did not really get the buzz at all this year, and I was surprised to see it come in quite so hot into the Game Awards.
I mean, Forbidden West was a really good game. I'm not surprised to see that there at all.
It was, and it is. I'm not denying that at all, but it just felt like it fell a wee bit flat. Like, no one is talking about it in that same category, as like no one's really, as far as I can tell, seriously saying that it would get that award over God of War or Elden Ring, right?
Well, no, but I'm not saying that about any of the other games.
No, and that's kind of where I was going here as well. Like, A Plague Tale, it's kind of mixed. Sure, it's good, but mixed reception. Stray was good, but it's not the best. I don't even know if it's the best indie this year, really. It's certainly not one of the greatest indies of the last, 3, 4, 5 years. Xenoblade, I don't want to comment on because I've just not played it. It's not really crossed my radar properly. So, I mean, I'm willing to accept that those are all good games, and I think that holds across a lot of the list. There's like quite obvious picks maybe in a lot of them, and then a lot of other categories where there's no obvious pick because there's kind of no obvious standout, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't deny that. I suppose I think that any category that God of War and Elden Ring are in, it will be between the two of them. or if one of them is in any particular category, it will probably win it, because they are by far and away, as far as I'm concerned anyway, and granted we've only played 10 hours of God of War, but comfortably saying that they are likely to be the two best games of the year, probably by some distance. And as I said, I think that particularly when it comes to Game of the Year, Horizon Forbidden West, as far as I'm concerned, fully deserves to be there. I think Plague still fully deserves to be there as well, to be honest with you. Stray, maybe not quite so much, but I mean, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, folk absolutely love that. I mean, I'm into JRPGs and whatever, but I've never played that one, but folks seem to be going absolutely nuts for it. So, I mean, so far as I'm concerned, it's a perfectly alright list, but pretty top heavy is how I would say.
Yeah.
Also, Immortality, Sam Barlow's new game, not being in the best indie games is madness to me, but being in things like game direction, I don't know how that's missed best indie, but has got into game direction somehow. It seems a bit mad.
There's a few things like that across the list, and again, there always will be, and it's not really worth wasting a lot of energy over getting upset about these things. But
no,
for Immortality not to be in there over Stray maybe as a Game of the Year candidate, I mean, it's certainly reviewed better and it's up for, like you say, some of those big awards alongside Stray. You can only have so many. People are going to have a lot of games. Again, this has been a year where probably most people, or a lot of people who are really deeply involved in the industry, have probably played more AA and indie games, and probably will love a lot of those, but they're just never going to stand out on when it comes to award voting like this, because you kind of need critical mass to get things on a list. So, it's daft that people get so heat up about this stuff,
As and we are going to be doing our predictions of the Game Awards later on at some point, Lewis, as well. And to be clear, it's a bit of fun.
Yeah,
it's a good laugh. All of this is quite good fun. I quite like seeing all these games getting recognition and stuff like that. But as you're saying, the flip side to that is that I think that a lot of games are probably going unrecognised just because of their scale and just because they don't fall into these certain niches that the Game Awards puts out there. Do you know what I mean? So, more work to be done in terms of recognition, but at the same time, I enjoy celebrating video games, which is what this award show's all about.
Don't judge games by the awards they've won, but by all means enjoy when games get celebrated. I think that's the takeaway message from all of that.
Absolutely, Lewis. Very positive. I like that. Alright, Lewis, news item number 2. There has been yet more news on the Xbox Activision deal, and specifically keeping Call of Duty on PlayStation. This time from The Verge's Decoder podcast, in which Phil Spencer said he is open to making a commitment to Sony and regulators to make Call of Duty stay on PlayStation. Phil Spencer has made this statement to The Verge.
Native Call of Duty on PlayStation, not linked to them having to carry Game Pass, not streaming. If they want a streaming version of Call of Duty, we could do that as well, just like we do on our own consoles. There's nothing behind my back. It's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 doing great on PlayStation, doing great on Xbox. The next game, the next, native on the platform, not having to subscribe to Game Pass. Sony does not have to take Game Pass on their platform to make that happen. There's nothing hidden. We want to continue to ship Call of Duty on PlayStation without any kind of weird, aha, I figured out the gotcha. I understand some people's concerns on this, and I'm just trying to be as clear as I can be.
So obviously that is a transcript from the podcast. Obviously, there has been a lot of speculation about what Xbox's intent was around keeping Call of Duty on PlayStation, e.g. would they force PlayStation to adopt Game Pass in order to keep Call of Duty on their system, which obviously PlayStation would reject. Or would they just offer a streaming version of Call of Duty on PlayStation? But this statement seems to refute both of those points. And to be honest with you, I don't really see any reason to doubt that he's telling the truth. However, I think that the question then becomes, is that still true in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 15 years' time? Because when you're talking about that sort of time frame, a lot can change. And if Xbox decide to pull Call of Duty off of PlayStation and make it a console exclusive, do PlayStation have any sort of legal challenge there? Do they have any sort of foot to stand on? And maybe more importantly, is that promise from a heavily invested CEO, as Phil Spencer is, going to be enough for regulators to approve this deal without restrictions in the first place, This all comes in the same week that the European Commission's deputy head of unit Interinstitutional and Outreach, Ricardo Cardozo, has tweeted saying that the Commission is working to ensure that you will still be able to play Call of Duty on other consoles, brackets including my PlayStation. He got a huge amount of pushback from this, claiming that this was PlayStation bias, because obviously that's what all these people are doing, Liz. They just definitely want to play Call of Duty on PlayStation. That's the only reason anyone's involved here. He has since confirmed that he is not involved in the assessment of the transactions at all, just FYI, and he said that these views are his personal views and not that of the Commission. But it is interesting to get a sort of insight into how they see this. Liz, it feels as though this is the news story that just will not go away in a lot of ways, and we will just be talking about this every single week until the view eventually goes through, and probably then sometime after it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. It does feel like this year's sort of Bethesda deal or whatever, the story that we just can't quite get away from. This is interesting. I mean, I guess whether or not the 2 points you put forward there, is it enough to sway these regulators, and how long can a promise like this last, are kind of the key ones. I have no idea about the regulatory side of things. If I was Sony, I would want all of this like in writing and a signed contract before I agreed that the deal could kind of move forward without me going ballistic again at all the regulators. But I don't know if that's, maybe that's not required by these regulators either. And I think you're probably right. Like, Phil Spencer has no particular reason to say this unless he means it, because ultimately, if they want this deal to go through, and if this is the kind of concession they're going to have to make, then he's just going to have to live with that. But the flip side to me is that question that you put there, Mark, about what does this look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time or whatever. Sony can't seriously expect to get some sort of forever license, like an in perpetuity deal. For as long as there's a game called Call of Duty, it will be published on PlayStation, no matter what the state of the PlayStation might be. I just can't see that they could possibly imagine that. So this conversation will come up again in future, even if Phil Spencer agrees to it for the next 10 years rather than the next 5 or whatever we're on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that getting a deal in perpetuity is just not realistic, but at the same time, that is what Phil Spencer previously promised. He said, as long as there's a PlayStation, Call of Duty will be on it. Do you know what I mean? Basically implying that in perpetuity it will be there. However, legally, and when it gets down to the actual business of that, I don't think that will actually happen. But are PlayStation willing to take this on good faith in the same way that they have done with Minecraft or whatever, which was used by Phil Spencer as another example of how they're going to treat Call of Duty? Probably not when it comes to the stakes of Call of Duty, which, as I said, are just so enormous that it's difficult to overemphasize just how important it is to both sides. It's important to Phil Spencer's deal, it's important to PlayStation's bottom line and the money that they make year on year, you know what I mean? I don't know what's going to come of all this. To be honest with you, I'm more and more thinking that this might be more difficult than we ever thought to actually get over the line with no restrictions in place. It does look as if Call of Duty probably is going to be on PlayStation for at least the foreseeable future, at least until the end of this generation. We know for a fact, maybe beyond that as well, but I'm not sure that, as I said, the promise of Phil Spencer is going to be good enough for PlayStation or is going to be good enough for regulators, and I think that's really what we have to find out here, Alright, let's news item number 3. It has been revealed this week that PlayStation have been actively working on NFTs and blockchain technology, a Sony patent has revealed. Lewis, why will blockchain and NFTs just not massively fuck off? Why do they keep on rearing their ugly head every fucking 2 seconds?
Because that's life, Mark. That's the life we've been dealt.
Oh, God. I was going to get Lewis to read out a whole bunch of stuff from the patent, but honestly, it's the usual NFT bullshit. It's giving players the ability to buy and sell unique digital assets and use them in games. They are also spreading the lie that this could be used to track assets across different systems, which, while might be technically possible, is completely fucking untenable, at least as things stand right now. There was no mention of play to earn, which might be a painfully thin silver lining here. However, Sony have put their own unique spin on this utter bullshit, saying that they want to set up some sort of ecosystem whereby players could buy, sell or rent unique assets used by celebrities or popular game streamers. fans, comparing it to how baseball fans want a home run ball or an autographed ball of Babe Ruth's, which just isn't the same thing as far as I'm concerned. So basically they want to set up a system whereby you can pay probably a ludicrous amount of money to get a skin that Ninja used one time in a game of Fortnite, which is only unique because they made it unique, so that you can look like Ninja did in that one game of Fortnite that you played that one time. It's just nonsense. It's fucking nonsense. All of it's bullshit. It is worth noting that this patent was filed last year, but has only come to light this month. And since last year, the NFT/blockchain landscape looks very differently now. However, that is not the only news on this front. Recently, Microsoft have also recently invested 46 million in a Korean gaming company which specialises in blockchain technology, and FIFA have announced no less than 4 blockchain games to coincide with the Qatar World Cup. As I said when this all started booming last year, Lewis, I think that there are going to be multiple pushes to make blockchain mainstream, whether that comes through video games or whether that comes through a different avenue. I think that we've sort of weathered the first storm, but I think that there is much more to come here. Ultimately as well, I think that big companies, specifically companies like Sony and like Microsoft, want this to work, because if it does work, they stand to make an enormous amount of money, and that is the scary thing here, you know?
Yeah, it definitely is. Businesses, no matter how much of a relationship we want to pretend we all have with them, are ultimately going to do whatever they can to make more money. And so I think you're right that there's a good chance that this will never quite go away until it's provably not going to make a profit for these companies. And it will, because it's a simple grift and people are falling for it. I think this is really just disappointing and disheartening. I am clinging to the idea that it is a patent that they put out because they were exploring the tech, and since then have decided not to bother. And the one thing that makes me sort of have a shred of hope for that is that when people were asking if the PlayStation Stars scheme was essentially an NFT scheme in disguise, they were quite direct about refuting
they were pretty
that.
explicit in saying that no, it's
they
not.
Were like, definitely
However,
not.
they have now set up a system which looks a lot like an NFT system might look should they choose to implement it.
Exactly, yeah.
But to your point as well, just because they have filed a patent for something doesn't mean that that patent will ever necessarily come to light. Like, they are just sort of legally covering their own arse, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's just no way a major tech company like that is not going to have been doing some work around this as these new technologies emerge. They would be stupid not to, because it could turn into something. But at the moment, it's not, and PlayStation shouldn't be trying to implement it at all. And I really hope that this, the best thing would be if they kind of came out and just refuted it now and sort of said we're not doing that, because it would lay things to bed, and it would also be do a bit of damage to the blockchain kind of argument if other big companies come out and kind of say, nah, we're not doing this. But I wouldn't be stunned, like you say, if in a few years' time they do have things like this. I don't think that the dread fear of NFT gaming, as we were kind of talking about it last summer, is going to happen anytime soon, because I don't think any of these things have proven themselves. I cannot wait to see whatever these FIFA games are going to be. Important to say, not EA's FIFA. This is games commissioned directly by FIFA, the corrupt global footballing body. And so, yeah, that would be fascinating to see what that's all about.
Yeah. Can you tell Lewis isn't a great fan of FIFA either? It's two of his most hated things collide in those games. Alright, Lewis, news item number 4. Riot Games and Ubisoft are teaming up for a research project targeting toxicity in online games. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, haven't both of these studios been in the news recently because of toxic work cultures and sexual harassment claims and sexual discrimination claims? And therefore, wouldn't it be a bit fucking rich if they headed a project like this? To which my answer is yes. That said, I think that Riot has sort of turned the corner on a lot of that stuff, but Ubisoft certainly fucking hasn't, from the last reports that we've got from there. However, I think that this type of research is ultimately good and is important, really, and anything that is curbing toxicity in online video games, I mean, it can't be a bad thing, let's be honest. So the Zero Harm in Comms research initiative, as they're calling it, aims to create a cross-industry shared database and labelling ecosystem that gathers in-game data, which will better train AI-based preemptive moderation tools to detect and mitigate disruptive behaviour. So that is what they're trying to do, Liz. With both sides saying that they acknowledge that disruptive player behaviour is a problem and is a difficult problem to solve. With Riot and Ubisoft saying that they will share their learnings from the initial research phase to the entire industry next year. This also comes in the same week as Xbox acknowledged that they proactively suspended 4.8 million user accounts in the first half of 2020 alone. So online player behaviour is still a big problem in the industry when it comes to toxicity and that online, and is probably taken a bit of a backseat from the limelight because there's been so other much bullshit happening in the industry, Lewis, but it's still definitely a real problem, and I think that any sort of research and ability to curb that is a good thing, despite the fact that it's coming from two people with sketchy histories in themselves.
Yeah, definitely interesting that it would be these two that would come together to do this. I guess, I'm willing to hope that this is, the result maybe of internal schemes to promote less toxicity in gaming or something, in response to the kinds of issues that they have had internally. No evidence for saying that. It might not be that at all. It could easily be, a university proposal or something that they've picked up. But yeah, you'd like to think that this is part of an effort for them to clean up and not just a sort of whitewashing attempt to sort of go, look, we're doing a good thing over here. Ultimately, the research does sound pretty good. Like, it sounds like, who knows if you can really get accurate AI models that could do anything about harmful player behaviour, and ultimately people will tend to just flow around a lot of these restrictions, I imagine. But if you can make even a small dent in the amount of toxic shit that's flying about online, then great, and these are two companies where you can see why they particularly would invest the time and the money in that, given how important certain online games are to their whole income.
Yeah, definitely. Particularly Riot.
Riot,
that is their whole deal, and I think some of their games, particularly LoL and Valorant, have bad problems with this. But it's not specific to them. I'm not coming down on them. That's not their fault. This is a industry-wide problem that has been a problem for a very, very long time. So, yeah, as I said, the more research they can go into this to curb this issue as much as physically possible gets a thumbs up from me as far as I'm concerned. Definitely, and really good of them to share that out with the industry as well, and kind of not make it about like proprietary technology that they're developing that to stamp something out in their games, but actually turn it into something that can be taken and implemented elsewhere. Yeah, exactly, like actually better the industry. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. All right, let's finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number one, Pentiment has come out this week. This is the weird hand-drawn adventure game by Obsidian, which is currently sitting with a very nice 86 on Series X and 88 on PC. Honestly, Lewis, when I first saw this game, I didn't give it a fucking chance. I thought that the art style rubbed me entirely the wrong way, I have to say. I didn't know what was going on with the game. I didn't like the way it was looking, but maybe I should have given a studio of Obsidian's caliber a bit more credit, because they seem to have quite low-key here produced a really impressive game.
Seems so, yeah. Totally caught off guard by this. Felt like the game just kind of crept up and suddenly was being released and got these pretty fantastic reviews across the board. Some some 10s from major outlets as well, which is still reasonably rare. I think particularly given what it is and how it looks. Yeah, I was the same. I didn't jump to this. It wasn't one of these indie games. Not that it is an indie game, but it wasn't one of these like smaller games that the art style really grabs you and makes you want to jump in and play it. I was a bit standoffish with it as well. But everything that we've heard from the reviews sounds kind of interesting. It's out on Game Pass. It might well be worth putting a few hours in to check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's a long experience. I think to call it an indie game when it's made by Obsidian and published by Xbox probably isn't quite right, but it's a shorter experience.
Yeah, but it's got that indie vibe. You can tell it's come from a smallish team within Obsidian. I think it might even have been one guy's kind of brainchild that's obviously been built out. So yeah, obviously not an indie game, I didn't really mean that, but just it's the kind of game that normally that style you would be like, oh great, and actually I think we both went, oh no, maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. Josh Sawyer was the guy who from Obsidian, it was basically his brainchild, I think, and he just got a small team together within the studio to produce this game, and seems to have knocked it out of the park. Seems to have done really well.
Supported that as well.
Fair play to him. Absolutely, yeah, and good that Xbox supported it as well. Alright, let's shout out number 2. Somerville has come out this week as well. This by Jump Ship Games, which is co-founded by one of the co-founders of Playdead, which made the incredibly influential Limbo and Inside. So this one I did have high hopes for, Lewis, but unfortunately it really hasn't reviewed all that great at all. Currently sitting with a pretty underwhelming 68 on Series X and 73 on PC. While the visuals have been praised, a lot of the key words from the reviews have been ambitious, buggy, and a slog, which for a game that is only 4 hours long, a slog isn't something that you should be associating with that, you know. However, it does seem as though, weirdly, the studio has been bought off the back of this. They are now part of Thunderful Games, who have made / published games like the SteamWorld Dig games, The Gunk, Lost in Random, Deadly Premonitions 2, that Lego Bricktales game, and they will be publishing Planet of Lana, which is coming out later this year as well, which is also something I'm pretty interested in. Ultimately, Lewis, I think that this has fallen a bit flat, which is really disappointing because I really had my eye on this, you know?
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, this one. I was a bit concerned that it seemed to be sort of stealthily dropped in the end. Like, it got announced when its release date was quite near to release and had been slipped in days after God of War came out, which didn't feel like a vote of confidence in it for me, but probably still worth checking out because, the people behind this, or at least the kind of lead person behind this, has a lot of clout and a lot of talent, certainly. I'd be interested to see how it differs from Limbo and Inside, to see if that's, if it's been unfavourably compared to them, basically, or if it is just not as sort of well executed as it might have been.
Well, yeah, it just seems as though that is the problem, to be honest with you. It was an ambitious idea, badly executed, is basically the impressions I was getting from the reviews, which is pretty disappointing, really. All right, let's shout out number 3. Remedy have confirmed that they are making Control 2, which will be co-developed and co-published by 505 Games, who published the first game, and Control, the first Control, is sort of what put them on the map as far as I'm concerned anyway. I mean, 505 have been publishing games for forever, but that felt as though they were taking a big leap forward, you know? They also said that the original game was 505's biggest investment, but confirmed that the budget for the new game would be even bigger, which is great because while I loved the first Control, I really, really liked it. It did feel as though that game was sort of like bursting at the seams, do you know what I mean? Particularly at launch when it did have a few technical issues, but they sort of sorted that out and came around the corner of that. This was also one of the first games to, in a big way, start implementing ray tracing and stuff like that. I really, really like Control. Very, very excited for this list.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I remember at the time having frustrations with the first game, but always thought, a sequel to this, now that it knows what it is and it can be kind of properly polished and refined for launch, a sequel would be fantastic. We basically knew this was coming. Like, Remedy had already told us that they were working on a bunch of Control projects, but I don't think they had ever officially said, a direct sequel to the first game. So it's good to know that that's there. It's good to know that 505 are putting in some more cash to make it as good as it can be. I really hope that this is that big, like, sophomore hit. It comes out and it improves on everything that the first game did and tidies up a lot of those tech problems, because as an IP, as an idea at the base of it all, that first game was fantastic and set up some really interesting possibilities, and particularly then that they've folded Alan Wake into all that, you can see that Remedy might be just kind of, seeing the horizon and really going for that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really hope that they just take this idea and run with it, because I do think that it's really interesting and it could go in many different directions, and the possibilities are sort of endless with the concept. So, and to be honest with you, I trust them to do something interesting with it, so I'm pretty excited for this, I've got to admit. Alright, and final shout out number 4. Call of Duty Warzone 2 has launched just a few hours ago as we record this, Lewis, although gamers will have to download a 70GB update in order to play the game, so enjoy waiting on that, all you gamers out there. There will be a whole new map, there's a new backpack system, there's new gulags, there's new loadouts, there's a new aquatic combat system, Lewis, which I'm sure would be incredibly fun and not terrible like all underwater things are in video games. There are no reviews yet for this because it's basically just came out, but also if we're judging it by Modern Warfare 2, this is going to go very, very well. It's going to be extremely successful. Reviews are really pretty irrelevant, to be honest with you. This is going to be enormous. It does feel as though it has come out very, very close to when Modern Warfare 2 came out, to the point that it's sort of stepping on its own toes a little bit, but ultimately, whichever flavour Call of Duty you want to play, you now have vastly more content. You certainly do, yeah. As if $1 billion in 10 days wasn't enough. Here comes another Call of Duty to hoover up all of your money. Obviously, this one will be free to play, but will then soak up
nickel and dime on the microtransactions.
Exactly. It does seem a little odd that they've come out so close together. I guess it's got now part of the same package to an extent. Like, you can get one through the other. You can get Warzone.
Yeah, so I think it's part of Modern Warfare 2, sort of, but you can also just play it standalone.
Get it separately,
so also not really.
Yeah, so you can. It seems odd to me in a certain sense that they didn't come out exactly at the same time or much further apart. You know, like the 2 or 3 weeks that there's been since launch doesn't feel like. Yeah, it's an odd decision has been taken there. I'm sure that they've worked out why they're doing that, and it is not going to make any difference. They're going to rake it in. But when will we see, Mark, a move towards the mainline games just being campaigns and Warzone being the big multiplayer game? Do you think they'll ever do that, or are they going to keep this
Absolutely not. Way too much money in the multiplayer.
But would you not, like, wouldn't they stand to make more by just making Warzone a massive multiplayer platform that everyone gets involved in, and then people choose to buy the campaigns if they want?
I mean, I think that would be better for gamers, but I think that would be worse for their bottom line, so they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be interesting. I think what's vastly more likely is that the mainline games ditch the campaign again, although that was vastly unpopular when they done it. But ditch the campaign again and then just be multiplayer, and they just have the standard usual multiplayer Call of Duty game, and you have the Warzone Call of Duty game, and that's just that. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, these games are going to be enormous. They're going to sell incredibly well. Everybody's going to be jumping into Warzone 2, I'm sure, and I'm sure many people will love it, because what I think people forget is that, like, as far as these games go, as far as military shooters go, Call of Duty is, like, really good. Like, there's a reason why it's very popular. Do you know what I mean? But if this is your cup of tea, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I will not be partaking in any of it. Might jump in to get a wee shot of Warzone 2, because I jumped into the original Warzone, had a few games just to see what was what. Might do the same for Warzone 2, but I will not be putting significant time into any of these games lists, if I'm totally honest.
I will not be either.
Shocking. The guy who hates FPSs. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is Keystone and the streaming future loose.
It is indeed, Mark. Yeah, this is picking up on another point that came out of the Phil Spencer Decoder interview that we were talking about earlier in the show, which sort of centred around Xbox Keystone, which is this long-rumoured streaming device that we've all been expecting Xbox to announce at some point, basically, this being the sort of almost like a Chromecast, like a plug-in streaming stick, essentially, that you could essentially use to play Xbox games or Game Pass games without a console or a PC infrastructure at all, just a plug-and-play streaming device. This has been sort of known about for a good long time, and very recently, actually, we covered the news story when it had appeared, or what people assumed it was, had appeared on the shelf behind Phil Spencer in his sort of time-honoured tradition of revealing things by putting them on his shelf in the middle of video calls, and that he has subsequently confirmed that that was Keystone. And in fact, in this interview with Decoder, kind of spoke a bit about that and said the version that we saw there had been built and worked really, really well, in his words. But, quotes, when you're building new products, it's always about, do you have the right design? Do you have the right user interface? Do you have the right customer proposition? And the customer proposition includes the price. And I think all of us knew that we were a little out of position on price. And he went on to say that that was because of, quotes, some of the silicon choices that we were making at the time we were designing, as well as his desire to include a controller with the package. All of that is to say, basically, it seems like Keystone has been sort of put on the back burner, not quite shelved. He himself has said that it's still something that they're focusing on and want to do at some point, but he's also recently said in another event that it's probably years away, and I'm not really sure that that is where we thought, and probably where a lot of people thought it really was as a project at the moment, because ultimately, Mark, the reason that I'm so fascinated by this streaming stick and this streaming future in a lot of ways is that it is a big part of Xbox's strategy right now is all about bringing people into the ecosystem and making as many games available to as many people as possible, however they can do that. And not being able to release this stick for the kind of price point that they're looking for, which seems to be basically $100 to $130, is a bit of a sort of stick in the mud for them in terms of that strategy. So I just wanted to kind of cover a few things around this. You've always been a big believer in this streaming future, much more than me. But
to be clear on that, I believe that is where the industry is headed. I don't think that the streaming future is necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's fair clarification to make. I suppose as well, the difference between what Xbox seem to be trying to do there and what a lot of people talk about this streaming future being is that you've kind of told me before that you think that ultimately we'll get to a point where we don't really need or won't have in-home consoles. You'll just have streaming capability and all of that processing power will happen elsewhere. But Xbox still seems to have a strategy basically where it sits alongside the rest of their kind of more traditional proposition. So do you think given that they can't get this out at the price that they think that it needs to be sold at, do you still think we'll see this device in some form in the future?
At some point in the future, definitely in the future at some point, yes. Because when I'm talking about the streaming future, right, I'm not talking about this generation of consoles or even the next generation of consoles. I'm talking 20, 25 years in the future. That's when I'm talking about that. That's when I'm saying that will be happening. Like, we won't have a PlayStation or an Xbox, we'll have a PlayStation and an Xbox app, and then all your games will just be available there, and then it'll be streamed, and the streaming, hopefully by that point in the future, will be so good that it will be indistinguishable from playing it in your living room. That's the sort of future I was talking about. So as a stepping stone to getting there, yes, I do think that something like this will come out at some point. Like, this is effectively Google Stadia, right? This is their model. This is exactly what they were doing with Chromecasts, but Phil Spencer wants to do it with a dedicated box. Yes, ultimately, yes. Do I think we see it this generation? Before today, honestly, I would have said definitely. I would have said, yeah, they are 100% pushing this. This seems to be a big part of Xbox's strategy. Their push for xCloud and all that was really, really big, tying that in with Games Pass. It was all pointing in this direction. Now, maybe not so sure. Maybe we're talking, maybe it's a next gen thing, or maybe it's a right at the end of the generation thing, you know?
Yeah, you could totally imagine that, and I do wonder if it seems like with the kind of price calculations that they were doing, they've reached the conclusion that they are kind of almost competing with themselves in terms of the Series S price point, and that's sort of why they can't do this.
Yeah, they've come out so competitively on the Series S price point that they can't release the streaming thing.
which is kind of remarkable in itself. To me, I always imagined that this could be quite a cheap piece of hardware. You know, the Chromecast is only about, £50 or something. And so if they can't get this to 130, that's telling me that the box itself, this device, must be doing a bit more legwork than I guess I've been imagining. And I think that that's particularly interesting when you think that they then did produce an app for Samsung TVs that could do this, that, it didn't even need the stick. So I guess that means that the TVs must have more of the processing power that they needed than other devices can do. But to me, that kind of poses the question generally of, like, is this device actually necessary then? Because if it can't do what other devices can do at that price point, then I'm not sure it's really ever going to hit the mark when you consider what the audience for this probably is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, to be honest with you. I mean, obviously, whatever they were doing with this box does require more silicon, as they're saying, more processing power, whatever it is, than a Chromecast, if they can't make it for that sort of entry-level price point of what you said. Like, it is about £50 or in that ballpark, certainly under 100, we'll say. And yeah, maybe we don't need the box if the TVs can eventually do it themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, if the internal smart TVs that are coming out at that time in a few years' time are all capable of doing whatever processing power that box has to do to stream a game to your TV, then yeah, maybe we're just doing it on apps. But I guess not every TV is going to do that.
Yeah.
Not every TV will be capable of that. I think being able to have Keystone and be able to take it to wherever location that you are, plug it into any TV and it works. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the benefit of Keystone, but do I think it is necessary? No. Do I even think it's what they're going to be pushing? Like, maybe not. They might be pushing that later on, but if you don't have that, we do have this other thing over here if your TV's not up to it. Or again, you do want this portability, like if you do travel or whatever quite a lot and you do want to game on the go, well, here's an easy way to do it. Plug this into any TV in your hotel with a decent internet connection.
Yeah,
hopefully.
That's the key.
Well, yeah, that all comes back to that. But if it has a decent internet connection and you can game away,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I guess that's the decision that Xbox have got to be looking at just now. I can't help but wonder if we were sitting in a different world right now, if we had a different sort of economic picture of the next wee while, that they might well have taken more of a hit on this than they probably can be doing from the kind of numbers that are being talked about here. Like, I think that they could probably sell this at a loss at the kind of $100 mark, assuming that that's not a colossal, percentage of the margin. But you could sell it for about that, with the presumption that subscriptions will eventually like pay for that, right? If you want people in. Yeah. But I suspect what's happening is that they're looking at what is presumed to be, I think we both agree that this would be targeted mainly at like quite a casual gamer market. It's an entry point.
Absolutely. This is for the casuals casual. This is for the sort of casual that bought a Wii U to play Wii Fit.
Exactly.
It's for those sort of people, This is for people who play games occasionally but don't necessarily call themselves a gamer. Like, I think that is who they should be targeting with this,
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the same way, not that they've got their kind of marketing of it right yet, but like Netflix's move into games seems to be very much about like, we're just going to put some interesting games in front of our existing users who are not necessarily gamers, rather than trying to impress you with, technological capabilities of modern consoles. So if that is the idea here, and I think that we are agreed that it sort of must be the idea, then they may well have looked at the economic environment and thought, well, those people are not going to lay down 12 quid a month on games, because that's too big a sort of risk right now for a lot of people who are not dedicated to this.
I never really considered that, to be honest, but that is not a bad thought at all. Yeah, those people who probably aren't particularly into games, and you're trying to snare in with this piece of tech, do you know what I mean, that says gaming can be very, very accessible for you and very, very affordable to you. But even if that affordability is still another subscription on top of your Netflix subscription and your Amazon Prime subscription and whatever, at a time of severe economic crunch, yeah, that might be a part of it. Certainly. I mean, undoubtedly it's come into the equation, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting to see how the kind of situation as it evolves can impact these massive decisions. We all just think, well, Microsoft have got loads of money so they can kind of do whatever they want, but they ultimately are having to look right now at their audience and think, who actually does have money and where are they likely to put it? And I think Phil Spencer actually has said quite similar things about, recognising that gaming is not, I think he said, it's not food or shelter. You know what I mean? It's not. It's a luxury, and so this is kind of what I thought about PSVR 2 last week as well. I was like, not the time, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Sony had put so much marketing and so much
they'd already started the ball rolling
behind that before it totally collapsed. But yeah, now the time for that to come out is totally terrible, and if Xbox can avoid that by simply delaying this, and it sounds as if they've not got the price quite right anyway, which means that they have to probably go into a redesign phase anyway, then maybe it's just, okay, put this on the shelf for a little while, we'll revisit this when the world wants it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they focus more on that TV market for the short term. Basically go to anyone who's got models coming out that could support it natively and put it out that way. But it is, again, that's going to leave behind the casual gamer who is not going to spend a fortune on a new TV. So ultimately, if they want this to be kind of what it feels like it's supposed to be, like the step down from the Series S, the even more casual version of the Series S, they might still need to put out some kind of hardware in the short term to capture those people, but it just can't be anything like if this was pushing up to like $200 or more, given the inclusion of a controller, that's just way too much, right?
I agreed. Yeah. This has to be very close to, if not at $100, and so, what that means in all the various countries. But yeah, it has to be about that price point, because if you're getting into, I would say, even $150, that is going to turn a lot of people away. And I do have to say as well, I think what he said about the controllers is absolutely correct. Like, you have to have a bundle with a controller when you release this thing. Yeah. You just do, but you also have to have an option just to buy the box itself at a lesser price, because there are many Xbox controllers from the Xbox One and even the Series X out in the wild now, and a lot of people don't necessarily need that piece of kit, and if you can market it at a lower price by doing that, then they should, because the price for this is so key. If it's going to be a budget console, effectively, it has to be budget, you know what I mean? It really has to be cheap.
I think, again, this is one of the spots where Xbox might have to take a bit of a hit on what might be wise for them in a wider sense, and that it would be better for them if they were able to snare a new audience, for that audience all to be using Xbox controllers and getting that full kind of Xbox feel for everything, but I agree. I think that they're going to have to do a version of this that doesn't come with a controller so that people can pick one up second hand or use one that they've got on another console or whatever already. Because yeah, to me, like this whole streaming future, I think, you know, if you do take what you were saying at the start there, like 25 years from now, yeah, everything could be different. I mean, we could be beaming video games out of our eyes by then if we're not all, you know, in the nuclear mud. But
which might be more likely.
Yeah, it does feel it all of a sudden. But yeah, the down the line, the future might look like that. But in the short term, there's got to be some quite radical steps taken, I think, to get this off the ground and get it working. Stadia is dead. This is kind of on the back burner. Like, is your kind of confidence in what that future looks like dented at all, or are you just thinking, yeah, long term, this is still going to be the future, but we might not get these halfway houses almost in the meantime?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I thought that there would be more this generation that would focus on streaming. But as you said, Stadia is dead now. Luna seems to be doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
xCloud is the only thing going here, really. I mean, I know PlayStation at their premium tier also do streaming as well, and technically they done streaming before any of these people done streaming with PlayStation now, which never worked and was never very interesting. But yeah, I did think that there would be much more of a push by now, admittedly. But yeah, long term, no, not changed, because my long term view is a very long term view, and I don't really need to change that based on these events. So. But I honestly, I thought that there would have been a big push from Xbox specifically this generation into streaming, but actually more and more that we're learning now, it seems to be actually that they're taking a wee step back from that.
Yeah, it definitely does seem like that just now. It'll be fascinating to see if they do pick this back up again in like a year's time, if the sort of global situation looks a wee bit different, or, you know, if they find other ways to get that price point down. I basically think if they can get that price point down, they will launch it just to see, you know, test the market, essentially, particularly because the tech infrastructure behind it is all in place, so they don't have to build all of that the way that Google did, and that works great. I mean, Steam Deck is my little streaming device at the moment in terms of just playing Xbox games on the cloud, so you know, I'm all for that.
No, nice one. Yeah, I think that, yeah, when we get into a different maybe economic situation whereby people have more money to spend, frankly, and the manufacturing cost of these things can come back down as well, because I don't think
absolutely, yeah,
it's really recovered from the pandemic. So yeah, there's a lot of factors at play here, certainly. All right, Lewis, I think we can call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSToo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Stories Untold. This by No Code from right here in Glasgow, Lewis. So, hometown boys, very, very excited to play this game. We did start this one late, as we started last month's late as well, but this one is a short one, so definitely plenty of time to get stuck into it, and I hope so, because I've still not started it yet, but it has now been downloaded.
Yeah, it's only supposed to be sort of 2 to 3 hours long. I'm hoping to treat it as a bit of a sort of bedtime stories type thing after playing a bit of God of War. Just take the Switch to bed and just kind of, yeah, spook myself with one of these little creepy horror stories, see what's going on. But yeah, really looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, me too. Definitely interested to sort of explore this studio as well, because as we said, we're doing Observation after this, which is No Code's next game, and we now know as well that they're going to be doing a Silent Hill game, so this is very much a studio on the up. Very, very keen to get started with these. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.